The Spirit of the Steppes. In ancient days there lived a king and queen, the former was old but the latter young. Although they loved one another dearly, they were very unhappy, for God had not given them any children. They fretted and grieved about this so deeply that the queen became ill with melancholy. The doctors advised her to travel. The king was obliged to remain at home, so she went without him, accompanied by 12 maids of honor, all beautiful and fresh as flowers in May. When they had traveled for some days, they reached a vast uninhabited plain which stretched so far away it seemed to touch the sky. After driving hither and thither for some time, the driver was quite bewildered and stopped before a large stone column. At its foot stood a warrior on horseback, clad in steel armor. "Brave knight, can you direct me to the high road?" said the driver. "We are lost, and know not which way to go." "I will show you the way," said the warrior. "But only on one condition, that each of you gives me a kiss." The queen looked at the warrior in wrath and ordered the coachman to drive on. The carriage continued moving nearly all day, but as if bewitched, for it always returned to the stone column. This time the queen addressed the warrior. "Knight," said she, "show us the road, and I will reward you richly." "I am the master spirit of the steppes," answered he. "I demand payment for showing the way, and my payment is always in kisses." "Very well, my 12 maids of honor shall pay you. 13 kisses are due to me, the first must be given by the lady who addresses me." The queen was very angry, and again the attempt was made to find their way. But the carriage, though during the whole time it moved in an opposite direction, still returned to the stone column. It was now dark, and they were obliged to think of finding shelter for the night, so the queen was obliged to give the warrior his strange payment. Getting out of her carriage, she walked up to the knight and looking modestly down allowed him to kiss her. Her 12 maids of honor who followed did the same. A moment later stone column and horsemen had vanished, and they found themselves on the high road, while a perfumed cloud seemed to float over the steppes. The queen stepped into her carriage with her ladies, and so the journey was continued. But from that day the beautiful queen and her maids became thoughtful and sad, and, losing all pleasure in travel, went back to the capital. Yet the return home did not make the queen happy, for always before her eyes she saw the horsemen of the steppes. This displeased the king, who became gloomy and ill-tempered. One day while the king was on his throne in the council chamber, he suddenly heard the sweetest warblings, like unto those produced by a bird of paradise. These were answered by the songs of many nightingales. Wondering, he sent to find out what it was. The messenger returned saying that the queen and her 12 maids of honor had each been presented with a girl baby, and that the sweet warblings were but the crying of the children. The king was greatly astonished, and while he was engaged in deep thought about the matter, the palace was suddenly lit up by lights of dazzling brightness. On inquiring into the cause, he learned that the little princess had opened her eyes, and that they shone with matchless brilliancy. At first the king could not speak, so amazed was he. He laughed and he cried, he sorrowed, and he rejoiced, and in the midst of it all a deputation of ministers and senators was announced. When these were shown into his presence they fell on their knees, and striking the ground with their foreheads, said, "Sire, save your people and your royal person. The queen and her 12 maids of honor have been presented by the spirit of the steppes with 13 girl babies. We beseech you to have these children killed, or we shall all be destroyed." The king, roused to anger, gave orders that all the babies should be thrown into the sea. The courtiers were already on their way to obey this cruel command when the queen entered, weeping, and pale as death. She threw herself at the king's feet and begged him to spare the lives of these helpless and innocent children, and instead to let them be placed on a desert island and there left in the hands of God. The king granted her wish. The baby princess was placed in a golden cradle, her little companions in copper cradles, and the 13 were taken to a desert island and left quite alone. Everyone at court thought that they had perished, and said one to another, "They will die from cold and hunger, they will be devoured by wild beasts, or birds of prey, they are sure to die, perchance they will be buried under dead leaves or covered with snow." But happily nothing of the kind happened, for God takes care of little children. The small princess grew bigger day by day. Every morning she was awakened by the rising sun and bathed by the dew. Soft breezes refreshed her and twisted into plaits her luxuriant hair. The trees sang her to sleep with their rustling lullabies, the stars watched over her at night. The swans clothed her in their soft raiment, and the bees fed her with their honey. The beauty of the little maiden increased with her growth. Her brow was calm and pure as the moon, her lips red as a rosebud, and so eloquent that her voice sounded like a shower of pearls. But wonderful beyond compare was the expressive beauty of her eyes, for if she looked at you kindly you seemed to float in a sea of joy, if angrily it made you numb with fear, and you were instantly changed into a block of ice. She was waited upon by her 12 companions, who were almost as charming as their mistress, to whom they were devotedly attached. Rumors of the loveliness of Princess Sudalisu spread far and wide. People came to see her from all parts of the world, so that it was soon no longer a desert island, but a thickly populated and magnificent city. Many a prince came from afar and entered the lists as suitor for the hand of Sudalisu, but none succeeded in winning her love. Those who bore with good temper and resignation the disappointment of being refused returned home safe and sound, but woe to the unlucky wretch who rebelled against her will and attempted to use an armed force. His soldiers perished miserably, while he, frozen to the heart by her angry glance, was turned into a block of ice. Now it happened that the famous ogre, Kosti, who lived underground, was a great admirer of beauty. And he took it into his head to see what the creatures above ground were doing. By the help of his telescope he was able to observe all the kings and queens, princes and princesses, gentlemen and ladies, living on the earth. As he was looking his eye fell upon a beautiful island, where, bright as many stars, stood 12 maidens, while in their midst, upon a couch of swan's down, slept a young princess lovely as the dawn of day. Sudalisu was dreaming of a young knight who rode a spirited horse, on his breast was a golden cuirass, and in his hand an invisible club. And in her dream, she admired this knight, and loved him more than life itself. The wicked Kosti longed to have her for his own and determined to carry her off. He reached the earth by striking it from underground 3 times with his forehead. The princess called her army together, and putting herself at its head, led her soldiers against him. But he merely breathed upon the soldiers and they fell down in an overpowering sleep. Then he stretched out his bony hands to take the princess, but she, throwing a glance full of anger and disdain at him, changed him into a block of ice. Then she shut herself up in her palace. Kosti did not remain frozen long. When the princess had departed, he came to life again, and started off in pursuit of her. On reaching the town where she dwelt, he put all the inhabitants into a charmed sleep, and laid the same spell upon the 12 maids of honor. Fearing the power of her eyes, he dared not attack Sudalisu herself. So, he surrounded her palace with an iron wall, and left it in charge of a monster dragon with 12 heads. Then he waited, in hope that the princess would give in. Days passed, weeks grew into months, and still Princess Sudalisu's kingdom looked like one large bedchamber. The people snored in the streets, the brave army lying in the fields slept soundly, hidden in the long grass under the shadow of nettle, wormwood, and thistle, rust and dust marring the brightness of their armor. Inside the palace everything was the same. The 12 maids of honor lay motionless. The princess alone kept watch, silent amid this rain of sleep. She walked up and down her narrow prison, sighing and weeping bitter tears, but no other sound broke the silence. Only Kosti, avoiding her glance, still called through the doors and begged her to refuse him no longer. Then he promised she should be queen of the nether world, but she answered him not. Lonely and miserable, she thought of the prince of her dreams. She saw him in his golden armor, mounted on his spirited steed, looking at her with eyes full of love. So, she imagined him day and night. Looking out of window one day, and seeing a cloud floating on the horizon, she cried, "Floating cloudlet soft and white, pilgrim of the sky, I pray you for one moment, light on me your pitying eye. Where my love is can you tell? Thinks he of me ill or well?" "I know not," answered the cloud. Asked the wind. Then she saw a tiny breeze playing among the field flowers, and called out, "Gentle breezelet, soul of air, look not lightly on my pain. Kindly lift me from despair, help me freedom to regain. Where my love is can you tell? Thinks he of me ill or well? Ask that little star yonder," answered the breeze. "She knows more than I." Sudalisu raised her beautiful eyes to the twinkling stars and said, "Shining star, God's light on high, look down and prithee see. Behold me weep and hear me sigh, then help and pity me. Where my love is canst thou tell? Thinks he of me ill or well? You will learn more from the moon," answered the star. She lives nearer the earth than I and sees everything that goes on there." The moon was just rising from her silver bed when Sudalisu called to her. "Pearl of the sky, thou radiant moon, thy watch o'er the stars pray leave, throw thy soft glance o'er the earth ere I swoon, overcome by my sorrows I weep, and I grieve. I pine for my friend, O ease thou my heart, and say, am I loved? In his thoughts have I part." "Princess," replied the moon, "I know nothing of your friend. But wait a few hours, the sun will have then risen, he knows everything and will surely be able to tell you." So, the princess kept her eyes fixed upon that part of the sky where the sun first appears, chasing away the darkness like a flock of birds. When he came forth in all his glory she said, "Soul of the world, thou deep fountain of life, eye of all-powerful God, visit my prison, dark scene of sad strife, raise up my soul from the sod, with hope that my friend whom I pine for and love may come to my rescue. Say, where does he rove?" "Sweet Sudalisu," answered the sun, "dry the tears that like pearls roll down your sad and lovely face. Let your troubled heart be at peace, for your friend the prince is now on his way to rescue you. He has recovered the magic ring from the nether world, and many armies from those countries have assembled to follow him. He is now moving towards Kosti's palace and intends to punish him. But all this will be of no avail, and Kosti will gain the victory, if the prince does not make use of other means which I am now on my way to provide him with. Farewell, be brave, he whom you love will come to your aid and save you from Kosti and his sorceries, happiness is in store for you both." The sun then rose upon a distant land where Prince Junak, mounted on a powerful steed and clad in golden armor, assembled his forces to fight against the giant Kosti. Thrice he had dreamt of the beautiful princess shut up in the sleeping palace, for the fame of her loveliness had reached him, and he loved without having seen. "Leave your army where it is," said the sun. "It will not be of the slightest use in fighting against Kosti, he is proof against all weapons. The only way to rescue the princess is to kill him, and there is but one who can tell you how to do it, and that is the witch, old Yaga. I will show you how to find the horse that will carry you straight to her. First take the road to the east and walk on till you come to a wide plain. There, right in the middle of the plain, are 3 oaks, and in the center of these, lying close to the ground, is an iron door with a copper handle. Behind the door is the horse, also an invisible club, both are necessary for the work you must do. You will learn the rest afterwards. Farewell." This advice astonished the prince greatly, he hardly knew what to do. After deep reflection he crossed himself, took the magic ring from his finger and cast it into the sea. Instantly the army vanished like mist before the wind, and when not a trace of it was left, he took the road to the east. After walking straight on for 8 days he reached a large green plain, in the middle of which grew the 3 oaks, and in the center of these, close to the ground, was the iron door with the copper handle. Opening the door, he found a winding staircase which led to a second door bound with iron and shut by means of a huge padlock 60 pounds in weight. At this moment he heard the neighing of a horse, the sound being followed by the opening of 11 other iron doors. There he saw the war horse which centuries ago had been bewitched by a magician. The prince whistled, the horse immediately bounded towards him, at the same time breaking the 12 iron chains that fastened him to the manger. He was a beautiful creature, strong, light, handsome, full of fire and grace, his eyes flashed lightnings, from his nostrils came flames of fire, his mane was like a cloud of gold, he was certainly a marvel of a horse. "Prince Junak," said the steed, "I have waited centuries for such a knight as you, here I am, ready to carry you and serve you faithfully. Mount upon my back and take hold of the invisible club that hangs at the pommel of the saddle. You yourself will not need to use it. Give it your orders, it will carry them out and do the fighting itself. Now we will start, may God look after us. Tell me where you wish to go, and you shall be there directly." The prince quickly told the horse his history, mounted, seized the club, and set off. The creature capered, galloped, flew, and swam in the air higher than the highest forests but lower than the clouds. He crossed mountains, rivers, and precipices, he barely touched the blades of grass in passing over them, and went so lightly along the roads that he did not raise one grain of dust. Towards sunset Junak found himself close to an immense forest, in the center of which stood Yaga's house. All around were oaks and pines hundreds of years old, untouched by the axe of man. These enormous trees, lit up by the rays of the setting sun, seemed to look with astonishment at the strange guest. The silence was absolute. Not a bird sang in the branches, not an insect hummed in the air, not a worm crawled upon the ground. The only sound was that made by the horse as he broke through the underwood. Then they came in sight of a small house supported by a cock's foot, round which it turned as on a movable pivot. Prince Junak cried, "Turn around, little house, turn around, I want to come inside. Let thy back to the forest be found, thy door to me open wide." The little house turned around, and the prince entering saw old Yaga, who immediately cried out, "What, Prince Junak? How have you come here, where no one ever enters? You are a silly old witch, to worry me with questions instead of making me welcome," said the prince. At these words old Yaga jumped up and hastened to attend to his needs. She prepared food and drink, made him a soft bed where he could sleep comfortably, and then leaving the house passed the night out of doors. On her return in the morning the prince related all his adventures and confided his plans. "Prince Junak," said she, "you have undertaken a very difficult task, but your courage will enable you to accomplish it successfully. I will tell you how to kill Kosti, for without that you can do nothing. Now, in the very midst of the ocean lies the island of eternal life. Upon this island is an oak tree, and at the foot of it, hidden in the earth, a coffer bound with iron. A hare is shut up in this coffer, and under her sits a grey duck whose body contains an egg. Within this egg is Kosti's life. If it be broken, he dies. Goodbye, Prince Junak, start without loss of time. Your horse will carry you to the island." Junak mounted his horse, spoke a few words to him, and the brave creature fled through space with the swiftness of an arrow. Leaving the forest and its enormous trees behind, they soon reached the shores of the ocean. Fishermen's nets lay on the beach, and in one of them was a large sea fish who, struggling to free itself, spoke to the prince in a human voice. "Prince Junak," he said sadly, "free me from my prison. I assure you, you will lose nothing by doing me this service." Junak did what was required of him and threw the fish back into the water. It plunged and disappeared, but he paid little attention to it, so occupied was he with his own thoughts. In the far distance could be seen the rocks of the island of eternal life, but there seemed no way of reaching it. Leaning on his club he thought, and ever as he thought he grew sadder and sadder. "What is the matter, Prince Junak? Has anything vexed you?" asked his horse. "How can I help grieving when, while in sight of the island, I can go no further? How can we cross the sea? Get on my back, Prince, I will be your bridge, only take care to hold on tight." The prince held firmly to its mane, and the horse leapt into the sea. At first, they were plunged right beneath the waves, but rising again to the surface swam easily across. The sun was about to set when the prince dismounted on the island of eternal life. He first took off his horse's harness, and leaving him to browse on the green grass, hurried to the top of a distant hill, whence he could see a large oak. Without losing a moment he hastened towards it, seized the tree with both hands, pulled at it with all his might, and after the most violent efforts tore it up by the roots from the place it had filled for centuries. The tree groaned and fell, and the hole in which it had been planted appeared like an immense case. Right at the bottom of this case was a coffer bound with iron. The prince took it up, broke the lock by striking it with a stone, opened it and seized the hare that was trying to make its escape. The grey duck that had lain underneath flew off towards the sea. The prince fired, struck the bird, the latter dropped its egg into the sea, and both were swallowed by the waves. Junak gave a cry of despair and rushed to the beach. At first, he could see nothing. After a few minutes there was a slight movement of the waves, while upon the surface swam the fish whose life he had saved. It came towards him, right onto the sand, and dropping the lost egg at his feet, said, "You see, Prince, I have not forgotten your kindness, and now I have found it in my power to be of service to you." Having thus spoken it disappeared in the water. The prince took the egg, mounted his horse, and crossing the sea with his heart full of hope, journeyed towards the island where Princess Sudalisu kept watch over her sleeping subjects in the enchanted palace. The latter was surrounded by a wall and guarded by the dragon with 12 heads. Now these heads went to sleep in turn, 6 at a time, so it was impossible to take him unawares or to kill him, for that could be done only by his own blows. On reaching the palace gates, Junak sent his invisible club forward to clear the way, whereupon it threw itself upon the dragon, and began to beat all the heads unmercifully. The blows came so thick and fast that the body was soon crushed to pieces. Still the dragon lived and beat the air with its claws. Then it opened its 12 jaws from which darted pointed tongues, but it could not lay hold of the invisible club. At last, tormented on all sides and filled with rage, it buried its sharp claws in its own body and died. The prince then entered the palace gates and, having put his faithful horse in the stables and armed himself with his invisible club, made his way for the tower in which the princess was shut up. On seeing him she cried out, "Prince, I rejoice to see your victory over the dragon. There is yet a more terrible foe to conquer, and he is my jailer, the cruel Kosti. Beware of him, for if he should kill you, I shall throw myself out of window into the precipice beneath. Be comforted, my princess, for in this egg I hold the life or death of Kosti." Then turning to the invisible club, he said, "Press forward, my invisible club, strike your best, and rid the earth of this wicked giant." The club began by breaking down the iron doors, and thus reached Kosti. The giant was soon so crippled with blows that his teeth were smashed, lightnings flashed from his eyes, and he rolled round and round like a pin-cushion. Had he been a man he must have died under such treatment. But he was no man, this master of sorcery. So, he managed to get on his feet and look for his tormentor. The blows from the club rained hard upon him all the time, and with such effect that his groans could be heard all over the island. On approaching the window, he saw Prince Junak. "Ah, wretch!" cried the ogre. "It is you, is it, who torments me in this way?" And he prepared to blow upon him with his poisonous breath. But the prince instantly crushed the egg between his hands, the shell broke, the white and yellow mingled and flowed to the ground, and Kosti died. As the sorcerer breathed his last, the enchantments vanished, and the sleeping islanders awoke. The army, once more afoot, advanced with beating drums to the palace, and everything fell into its accustomed place. As soon as Princess Sudalisu was freed from her prison, she held out her white hand to her deliverer, and thanking him in the most touching words, led him to the throne and placed him at her side. The 12 maids of honor, having chosen young and brave warriors, ranged themselves with their lovers round the queen. Then the doors were thrown open, and the priests in their robes entered, bearing a golden tray of wedding rings. Thereupon the marriage ceremony was gone through, and the lovers united in God's name. After the wedding there were feasting and music and dancing, as is usual on such occasions, and they all enjoyed themselves. It makes one glad to think how happy they were, and what a glorious time they had after their misfortunes.